All right, so welcome back. In my previous lecture, we saw the logical operators and how to make more complicated logical statements with these operators. So in this lesson, that means that we're going to learn one of the most important concepts in all of programming languages. You ready? Well, okay, so the reason that I say conditionals are so important is that with these statements, you can add decisions to your code. So it's how you add logic to your programming, all right? So here I'm going to give you a few examples of real-world uses for conditionals. Let's take an example of user login, for instance. So when you go to log in on a website, you type in a password in that form, and the background there is a code block, right, that checks that password that you typed against the password in the database. So if they match, you get to log into the site and you get redirected to another page. If they don't match, you usually get an error message. So there's a couple of different pathways given by the same exact code block, right? You can either go one path or on the other. So another example would be when you buy something from an app, when you type in your credit card information. So if you type in the right information, you might get a confirmation email and you'll see a yay success screen. And if there's a problem, then you're going to get an error message. So again, in the background, there's a code block which controls these different situations and then gives you different answers. Now you can add this logic with conditional statements. So let's start to learn about conditional statements, and you'll see why, if you haven't seen why already. All right, so there are three key words I need you to remember throughout this lecture, which are if, else if, and else. Yeah, so these are the three basic JavaScript conditional keywords. But of course, there are some other conditional statements in JavaScript. We're going to see them as well a little bit later in the course. But for now, let's create an example. Okay, so the example that we're going to use to illustrate conditionals is about a student and their grade. So the idea here is that we're going to have a grade variable, and if that grade is greater than an absolute score, you can go to the next class. And if not, well, you can't. So before we move on, we are going to do a quick little recap of the Boolean logic operators from the last video. The reason that we're going to do this is that we actually use our three keywords that I mentioned at the beginning, if, else if, and else. You might have recognized that. But these are now in conjunction with these Boolean operators to make our decisions to add the logic. So to recap, we've got less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Now, a quick question here. So what's the difference between these two? So what's the difference between triple equals and double equals? Yeah, so the difference is that double equals performs type coercion, while triple equals, well, that's just strict equals. So the difference is type coercion, and the same, this is for not equals as well. All right, so let's start there. Double equals means that the number 10 is actually going to be equal to the string 10. Because JavaScript doesn't care about type, right, when we're using the double equals. However, when we do triple equals, that, of course, is strict equal. It does care about type and value, both at the same time. So, number 10 is triple equal only to the number 10, not equal to string 10. All right, so then we've got these operators here. These three are and, or, and not. So remember that and is only true if both sides are true. However, or is true if one of the sides evaluates to true. Okay, so let's write our example. So the first thing we're going to see here is if the keyword if takes a single expression inside of a parenthesis, which it will evaluate to be true or false. So if it evaluates to be true, whatever code we provide inside the curly braces will be executed. So first of all, I'm going to declare a variable called grade. So I'll say var grade. Now I'm going to give a value for now. So down here, if I say grade is less than 40, and I put my curly braces, and inside of it all I am going to do is just to console log a statement. So here I'll say console log.log, and you cannot go to next class. All right, so this console.log will only be executed if the grade is less than 40. Now, if it's greater than 40, if it's equal to 40, we're not going to see this text printed up. So now we can move on. If I say else if, then inside the parenthesis, grade greater than 40 and grade less than 45. And inside the curly braces, I say console.log, and you can not go to next class, but you can enter the exam to raise your grade. And the way that else if works is that it follows an if statement, right? So it's a secondary condition. So in this case, we're checking to see if the grade is greater than 40 and if the grade is less than 45. So else if works the exact same way as if. We pass an expression in parentheses that will evaluate to be true or false. If it's true, the code inside the curly braces will be executed. If it is not true, so if it's false, nothing happens. So this is an important point here. The only way that this code is going to run is if this first if statement is false, right? Okay, so what that means is this code here will only run if the grade is greater than 40. So if your grade is greater than or equal to 40 and less than 45, you cannot go to the next class, but you can take the exam to raise your score, right? Okay, so the last step is the otherwise section, right? Which is else. So else allows us to just have something else happen any other time. So in this case, if your grade is not less than 40 and not between 40 and 45, yeah, that means you can go to the next class. So here I'll just say else and curly braces, and inside of it, console.log, and you can go to next class. So else does not take an expression in parentheses, right? So it's different in that way. We just write else, and then whatever we put inside the curly braces will only be run as a last option. So this will be run first, and if nothing is printed out, if this is not true, then we'll move on to this. If this is not true, then we'll move on to this. But remember, if along the way either of these is true, then everything stops and this else will not run. Yeah? So if this is true, this code is done. If this is false, then we're going to evaluate this. And if this is not true, then else runs. Cool. So remember, these are the three different paths for one decision here. Okay, so now we can have a look at the results. So here I'm going to give a value to the grade variable. I'll say grade is 38. Okay, so now before we go to the console, I want to think a moment here. So as its first step, we come to this if statement. And here our grade is 38, and it is less than 40, right? All right, so that means that this is true. This statement is true, so this code block will run, and the rest of the code will not be executed, right? Because we're going to look at to see if the statement was false. That's all. All right, so now let's go to the console. So here I can refresh the page, and yeah, here we can see you cannot go to the next class. All right, so let's return to the code editor. Now, let's see what happens when we make this 42. Now, I think that if this is less than 40, that this is not true, right? So inside the parenthesis is false. So we go to this else if statement. So here, 42 is greater than 40. Well, this is true. So now I need to look at the other side of the AND operator, right? Because the AND operator requires that both sides are going to be true. So I look to the other side, and here 42 is less than 45. Okay, so this is true as well. And what does that mean, my friends? It means a whole statement is true. So then this code block will be executed. And the rest of this code will not even be evaluated. So now let's save all this and go to the console. Here I'll refresh the page, and we'll see. You cannot go to the next class, but you can enter the exam. Okay, so what do you say we return to the code editor? And let's say that my grade is now 55. So then what happens? So this first statement is false, right? Because 55 is not less than 40. So let's look at this statement. First of all, 55 is greater than 40. This is true. Now let's look at the other side of the AND operator, and 55 is less than 45. Is that true? Of course not. So this side is false. So that means that this whole statement inside the parenthesis is false. You follow? So that means we're going to go to the next statement, which is else. So this code block will be executed. So I can save all this and go to my console. And sure enough, here we see you can go to the next class. All right, so that means that everything's working the way that we expected. So now let's return to the code editor. And here I want to give you an exercise. Ooh, yes, time to get up out of your chair and, no, different kind of exercise. So here's your exercise. Don't want to lose time reading the question here. So just pause the video and read the question and try to solve it. Then in the next video, we're going to solve the quiz together. But before that, please, please, please try it yourself. I know you can. All right. So now we'll pause here and we'll continue in the next section. Cool, cool, cool. See you then.